Hi there, my name is Suze, and I work with women to help them find balance between their internal masculine and feminine energies so that they can have lives that feel really emotionally fulfilling, full of love and connection. So, today I want to talk about what's your guilty pleasure. I love those two words together, guilty pleasure, because to me, in my world, in the world of feminine energy and masculine energy, to me, it's like literally like an oxymoron. And I love figures of speech. I was, let me just say this, you guys, hang on, total side note. I know you won't mind sharing from my personal life. I was the girl in high school, okay, who there would be a writing project and they'd be like, okay, 1,200 words on this thing, right? And I was the girl who could never just do 1,200 words, okay? And I was the girl who loved to write and had so much to say and got so excited about writing that like I would be the girl having too much and having to cut things out to bring my paper down to the expected length. You may notice that because I tend to get all excited on my videos too, but I try to really keep myself in line. So anyway, don't even know how I entirely got on that tangent, but here we are. So I love words, right? I've always had a love affair with words. I love colorful vocabulary. I love expressive, vivid vocabulary. And so guilty and pleasure, like I said, to me is like an oxymoron of sorts in my world because it's just so wrong on so many levels. And yes, I'm going to say wrong. I'm just going to say that. First of all, we have the word guilty. So right there in my body, I can feel it energetically. I hope you can too, because this is how I really work with energy. You say the word guilty, and I instantly feel like this. And when anyone is in a closed down space, we are clearly not in our power. We are clearly not being authentic because there's a shame element. Oh, I'm not supposed to like that thing, like with guilty pleasure, right? Pleasure is something we find enjoyment with. Pleasure is something we like. So guilty pleasure is I'm not supposed to find pleasure in this thing, but I secretly do. And I don't like that I find pleasure in this thing because I'm not supposed to find pleasure in this thing, but I do. And so there's a very closed down, which is then going to be inauthentic, which is going to be also denying an aspect of who we are. And the entire point of my message is taking all sides of me, the masculine and the feminine, integrating them together, having them collaborate together to create the physical reality that I want, that 10 of cups type energy of total emotional fulfillment and satisfaction in all of my life. The idea of the woman who has it all, right? That. So if I'm saying something I like, I find pleasure in, is a guilty pleasure, you're denying an aspect of who you are. And you're limiting your human experience, which you probably have heard the saying, I'm just a soul having a human experience in human school, right? So I'm here to experience the humanness and to create my path in that place of the human world. It has to be the human and the spirit, the human and the soul, the head and the heart working together. Neither is shamed, neither is denied. Their strengths are found and then they're brought together. Just like the masculine and the feminine energies, whether it be internal, your own energies, or externally with a masculine outside of you, it's both partners knowing each other so intimately that you know each other's strengths and you both emphasize and build on each other's strengths and therefore make a really strong unit, right? That is relationship healing, where you acknowledge, you understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. You do not use each other's weaknesses against each other, but you focus on the strengths, bring both of the strengths to the table, and create this really amazing, epic being together in unity, outer union, inner union, outer union. And as you all know, if you've been following me for any length of time, that external reality of the masculine, feminine, creating that unity consciousness, strong relationship healing, and unity to becoming one. It starts in here with the feminine and the masculine. And that's my whole message. But anyway, I tangent again. I'm going off on rabbit trails. I'm feeling passionate and I have a lot to say today. I hope you don't mind. So back to the idea of guilty pleasure. You're denying a part of you and something that you enjoy. And this is something that I have seen in my experience and in working with some women, where we come from this background or this life experience that shames even the idea of pleasure, and that pleasure is kind of bad or dirty in some kind of way. And you're not really supposed to have a whole lot of pleasure. Life is more like this, and life is hard, and life is a struggle, and you got to be good, and you got to do this, and then you got to do this, and you got to stay on the straight and narrow. And so the idea of going outside of that and finding happiness and pleasure is not really acknowledged or brought to the table. And maybe you've even had life experiences where, as a younger person, you kind of started to figure out things that made you happy or things that brought you pleasure, and then you were punished for it and you were shamed for it and told that that was wrong and you weren't allowed to do that or be that way, be that kind of personality coming forward. That was a big thing in my childhood. When I really finally started blooming and figuring out who I was, that big personality wasn't acceptable and it was quickly shut down in my childhood. So guilty pleasure. Now, if you're limiting an aspect of who you are, now you're limiting emotional availability. Because at its core, if you were to really oversimplify the idea of emotional availability, you're saying I am emotionally open and available to any experience, and I am going to receive and surrender into any emotional experience to learn from it, to grow from it. I'm going to be curious in any emotional experience, and I'm not going to label it as bad or push it away or deny it or shut down or escape or numb or run or busy myself, any of those things. I'm going to experience it and learn and expand from it. That was my feminine word of the day on Friday. If you missed my Feminine Friday, feminine energy tip of the day, expansive was the word. So if you're thinking something is your guilty pleasure, you're also, through a trickling effect of energy and how energy works, you're limiting your own emotional availability to yourself because you're shaming something and you're calling it bad and judging it and stifling it and putting it aside, right? So this is a term that I feel like needs to be worked with a lot here. Because then along the path of emotional availability even deeper, and I've talked about this, we have these emotional waves as women, right? We have the high positive emotions, and then you have the low emotions, right? And you have that baseline. I've talked about this before. I'll use this arm. You have your baseline, and then you have your highs and your lows that go like this, right? And the distance from here is going to be the same distance that is down here. That is how waves work. Waves of energy work like this. So if you allow yourself to experience more pleasure, it also means you're going to experience that level of lows. So if you're limiting anything, you're not truly emotionally available because you're keeping yourself in this smaller emotional wave box. I hope that makes sense. I will be expanding on these concepts as we go along, but I want to keep this as much as I can on the idea of guilty pleasure. So we have to learn, if we want to be bigger, if we want to be women who have it all, you have to learn and let yourself be it all, experience it all, learn how to hold the highs. I've done a video on that, holding the highs and not sabotaging them. So here's the thing. If your pleasure has an element of the high, right, of that, if you're allowing yourself more pleasure and you're not labeling it as guilty pleasure, and you're simply labeling it as this is something I find pleasure in, and you're allowing yourself to go into that higher territory, does that trigger fear? Because as I said, we know that when you go high, there is going to be a lower, the ebbs and flows. Some people say it's a little bit more of a graceful way to say it, right? The ebbs and flows of life. Do you limit your happiness because you're afraid of the crash? Are you strong enough? Have you developed the tools to know how to ground and come back into yourself and not avoid yourself when you're in the more of the lower place? Because you know that the more you hold the lower space and heal yourself there and be with whatever is, the higher you will go, continue to go. And that space is where the fullness of who you are. That's where the 10 of Cups is. You know, the highs, again, I have some notes saved. I was trying to keep myself on track here. I have some notes. The highs, sometimes we can have fear around them because it does feel a little bit unpredictable. When you finally let yourself experience really high places of pleasure, it's a little bit unpredictable, right? It's unknown. You haven't been there before. So it feels a little unstable, a little shaky. And then you have this fear of, well, this can't last forever, right? And it's going to come crashing down. And there's that triggers all into it. You know, hang on one second. So can we put aside the idea of the whole guilty pleasure and just see it as pleasure? And maybe not overindulge. Again, it's that finding that balance. One of my favorite books I ever read years and years ago, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And he talks about the pendulum, the human, and now the human, I just saw 1144, by the way, for those of you who know that, what that means. We have this thing, right? And we swing the pendulum. And when we have these dramatic experiences, we tend to swing the pendulum to the other extreme because we don't want to experience that other thing before. So maybe the next experience we choose is something polar opposite because we're trying to get away from that pain point over there. Whereas the more evolved or ascended perspective would be, why don't we keep the pendulum in the middle a little bit more? So it's not about, okay, I'm going to allow myself to go all in on this pleasure thing, right? It's okay, maybe if it's something that I realize is a guilty pleasure, and again, I don't like that term, but just so you understand, point of reference here, maybe I'm going to be careful not to overindulge, but I'm still going to allow myself. You know, back when I started doing this work, I've talked about this, my journey started in the health field and with my body. My body was very not okay, very physically sick. And so I started my journey in the physical world. And I worked in the world of gut health, blood sugar balance, and reducing inflammation in the body. And I'm still a huge advocate for those concepts. And so clearly the idea of sugar is something for me that is a really big deal. But I love chocolate, right? I mean, what woman doesn't like chocolate? I love chocolate. So I could say that chocolate's my guilty pleasure, but I don't label it that way. I simply allow it to be a pleasure, and I'm portion control. I have I have little heart-shaped, tiny little dishes that are shaped like hearts. I love them. And I'll have my chocolates in there, and I will slow down and really savor the experience, be present with the experience, and find so much pleasure. And it's funny to me how that's what we tend to do, right? Is we tend to do the opposite. We tend to, when we're in the space of pleasure, we rush it. And when you're rushing at pleasure, you tend to overindulge because you're not paying attention and you're not really juicing out all of the possible juicy moments if you were to slow down and savor it. You know, and this is a really big thing too with, again, working in the health world of, yes, let yourself have the thing. I don't believe in a lot of the traditional diets out there because, again, I don't believe in restricting and limiting and labeling things as good and bad necessarily. I'm more in the intuitive eating because if you know this is why a lot of those traditional diets, they're not sustainable. You can't continuously deny yourself and be rigid and strict about something for a very long extended period of time, there's a part of you that's going to rebel, and you're going against the feminine nature. You're literally working against the feminine nature. The feminine nature operates in a different world. And so diets, and I don't like that term, but I'm using it again for a point of reference, diets for women in particular, for that feminine energy, really should be approached in a different kind of way, really radically different kind of way. But anyway, back to the idea of guilty pleasure. One more thought on guilty pleasure. The guilty pleasure affects your self-worth. There's a lot of focus on the high value woman right now, the high value feminine energy, superficial feminine, divine feminine energy everywhere is really being promoted a lot, which is fantastic. And along that comes self-worth. High value equals high self-worth. And so if you're putting guilty pleasure into the mix, you're limiting your self-worth, because again, you're bringing shame and limitation and denial to the table, right? Sorry, I'm just reading my notes. I think I'm going to leave the video at this today. I know I'm ending this a little abruptly today, but I really like to keep these videos short to really give you bite-sized information, snack-sized information to think about and integrate more deeply into your life. Thank you so much for being here with me today. If you found value in this video, please subscribe and comment. Let me know you were here. I appreciate any form of support you have for this channel. And again, if you want to find me on Instagram or anywhere else, my website link, email, all of that is in the description box below. Thank you so much and have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.